We're back. That's right. Your favorite IDP analyst here at Fantasy and Frames, Jorge Edwards Justin Taylor. We are here for another year of the Shoot the Gap podcast. This is 8 years running here at Fantasy and Frames, JT, and every single year we have covered IDP. We love IDP Fantasy Football. We've won awards for covering IDP Fantasy Football, like you name it. And the popularity has grown for IDP Fantasy Football. And this time of year, popularity for fantasy football is kind of drifting towards Dynasty. So we thought, there's Dynasty that's popular now. IDP Fantasy Football kicks ass. Let's put them together, talk about it, and have a nice little show here tonight. So before we get into the details of everything we'll be talking about tonight, let's get to this. Welcome, everybody. Again, thank you very much for tuning in. We are excited to be back here on Fantasy and Frames Wednesdays, getting ready to start getting the regular lineup together. You know, last hour we had Dynasty 365 with myself, Drew Scott, and Mike. Mike Darling. Excuse me, Mike. That's going to come back and haunt me. I apologize. We talked about your regular Dynasty leagues, the ins and outs, how to start one up, rules and strategies, so on and so forth. And we took it from a perspective where it's like, we're not going to sit here and tell you this is what you should do, no matter what, no deviations, blah, 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 blah. Because at the end of the day, it's your damn league, and you can set it up and run it however the hell you choose to. And so we're here to give you some general ideas of, well, based off of this scenario, you may want to look at this, or based off of this scenario, you want to look at that. We're going to talk about, things that we like, in regards to the Dynasty leagues that involve IDP. We'll talk about IDP only leagues. We'll talk about IDP combo leagues on offense, player value, positional scarcity, recency bias, all that jazz we'll talk about tonight. Before we get into any of that, JT, the last time we were here on Shoot the Gap, we did our year-end show talking about things that we took away from the 2024 season. Now we're in 2025. First of all, how the hell are you doing, man?
I'm doing all right. It's cold. It's cold out there for most of us. I'm in the Midwest. It goes back and forth, man. It's crazy. It's like we'll get a 60-day and then all of a sudden a snowstorm 2 days later. In the middle of a snowstorm right now. I just got done coaching a fifth grade boys basketball game. I thought it was going to get canceled. It wasn't. So we fought through. We tied. We missed, we had 3 shots at the buzzer to win and missed. In this league, we don't do overtime, so we tied. But it was a good game. I'm all in on rookie stuff right now. I'm doing mock drafts on the Stew with JT Brew of all the rookie dynasty stuff. Jumped in. We did one on 365 the other day of a startup one. I tell you what, I love to draft, Jorge.
Mm-hmm.
Drafting is so much fun. I know mock drafts, people are like, it's not that, it's like, why are you wasting your time? I love it. I feel like I get info every time I do a draft with different people, especially when I'm in leagues with those people, because then I start seeing what they're doing. I know they're probably seeing what I'm doing, but I just like it. I think the more info, the more chances you take at it to look at it. I just love drafting. That's why Dynasty is so fun. I love the draft. I love the rookie drafts. Every redraft leagues are fun too. But you don't get those gems. When you get those gems, you get to keep them, have them. So much fun. So all that good stuff. Year 2 for me here on Shoot the Gap. So happy to be back. Thanks for having me back. Thanks for not kicking me off the show. I appreciate it.
Of course.
But yeah, just IDP. This is the time. This is where I'm starting to tweet out stuff about IDP. Like, this is the time. If you ever thought about it, now's the time to kind of look into it. Start looking into it, getting a league together, talk to some of your buddies. If you've never played and they've never played, this is the perfect time. Okay, get a league together. Try it all out at once. When I promoted an IDP full dynasty team to all my friends that were in my home league for over a decade, they thought I was insane. They're like, what? What are you talking about? And I'm like, it's this new thing. It's called Dynasty, and obviously it was new to them and newer to me. I was a little more involved. I was like, you keep your team forever, and let's add individual defenders. And people thought I was insane. They're like, what are you talking about? Then also I was like, you know what? Let's make this a huge money league. This isn't a $50 league. Let's put a ton of money in so that teams pay attention and can't leave the league and screw their teams over without, having to pay a pretty big, heavy price. It was a little bit of a nuts move by me and one of my buddies. But I got a bunch of friends in. They did it. We're on year. Trying to think about it now. I think this is year.
That's a good problem to have, though.
It's like 12 or 13 of the league. I'm trying to think exactly what year it is. But man, I tell you what, people were really, really iffy about it. And everyone in that league tells me that's their favorite league. Everyone that's in that league with me is like, I play in a lot of other leagues. This is my absolute favorite league. Because you just build, it's a 2 QB full on, like we give points for everything. We'll get into everything about this. We'll talk about it here later. Like, people thought I was crazy when I started that league, and now everyone loves it. They would never drop out. They're like, I have people begging me to get into the league. And I'm like, yeah, you gotta hope somebody else doesn't want to play anymore, because everybody it's to me, I have my original home league. This is like my second home league. It's like, and I feel like this is the one I care most about, because my original home team is just a redraft. And then we eventually turned into a redraft keeper league. It was like the next step for some of those guys are in both leagues, so they like them both. But now is the time to start thinking about it, Jorge. Don't wait till July. Don't wait till August to be like, you know what? I might want to get an IDP league. I might want to try it. I might want to try a dynasty league. No, now. Do it right now. Start getting friends together. Start looking into it. Start asking people about, watch this show. Watch this show. Go back and watch this show.
Ask us.
We're going to tell you, like, scoring, all the questions, all the things that we've fought through. It's a perfect time. When I started the league, I had no idea. I wasn't big on Twitter. I wasn't big on a lot of other things. I was just guessing. I'm like, let's just try it, And now there's all these resources out there. Fantasy and Frames being one of the best to go out there and get IDP resources. I mean, there were years where people were like, well, how do I know who's the best IDP guys? We didn't know. No one knew. There was no list. We're just going off what we did because we all watched football. So it's fantastic, man. I love it. I'm excited about this show. I love talking about this off-season stuff. Like, my girlfriend and I, I'm not going to lie. She was a little upset at me. I was like, oh, I got a show. She's like, I thought football season was over. I'm like, oh, we're back in it, baby. It's done. It never ends. She was not happy. She was not happy about having the show. It's snowing here. It's a snowstorm. She's like, I was hoping you were going to come over and watch a movie, and in case it snows, like, do the driveway. And I'm like, I got a show. So she's not happy about me being on the show, but you know what? She'll forgive me, and I got to be here for the people.
This is where you surprise her when she wakes up in the morning and her driveway is already shoveled, and her
Jorge, I will say, I'm working on a Valentine's Day thing for your help. I'm trying to get you to help me. That's why I was messaging you today about, like, I tell you what, someone who's worked on computers and was a journalism major, I am computer illiterate when it comes to certain things. I just have no idea how to do them. I'm like, I mess with it. I'm like, it is like, if somebody shows me and does it, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. But like, if I'm just free form trying to figure it out, it's a nightmare. And so that's why I was asking for your help. I'm trying to put something special together for her so that by the end of the week, she won't be so mad at me. So
there you go.
That's where we're at. We're trying to even things out here.
Well, you got bailed out by Valentine's Day. How about that? That's amazing. You really timed this one perfectly. This is great.
Yeah, I'm trying. I tell you what, Jorge, and this is way off the subject, but the NFL is going to have to be really careful with this, how stuff's moving back. If we get a Super Bowl Valentine's Day at the same time, it's going to be real bad. It's going to be real bad. They're scheduled people. Do not do this to the people. You will ruin lives. Like, we have to make sure we do not have a Super Bowl Valentine's Day eventually line up, because it would be really bad. it would be really bad if they fall in the same time, same weekend. So just that's my heat out to the schedule makers. Please make sure that never happens because it will be bad for everyone.
Or counterpoint, make sure it happens, and therefore you determine whether or not your love is real and can withstand anything.
Oh, Jorge, oh, we don't like those tests. We don't want those tests.
That's why we left school. That's why we're not in school anymore. We don't like those tests.
I don't want that test. I don't want that test. I would probably fail that test. That's why I don't want to do that. Let's not do that.
Jamie in the chat, which first of all, welcome back, Jamie, to Shoot the Gap. You better take her out to get a beef Wellington supper. LOL, not LOL. That something like that should be.
Trying to figure out right now what we're doing. There's I work in the restaurant industry, so I'm working on Valentine's Day always. So we never go out on Valentine's Day. I'll just throw that out there because I'm at the restaurant. But the next day, I'm looking at right now what we're doing. I'm trying to set something up special for that. And then, hey, luckily she's a sports fan, and we're going to the Illinois-Michigan State basketball game afterwards. Nice. So I'm like, hey, let's go to a nice dinner, and then I'll take you to the basketball game afterwards. I'm like, win-win. So, hey, every once in a while, I come out on top. It's not very often, but every once in a while I make some good moves and it happens.
Speaking of not the topic that we are here to talk about tonight. So Valentine's Day in Washington, D.C., SmackDown comes to the Capital One Arena. And I'm like, man, I've been wanting to go to a SmackDown and see like Cody Rhodes or Roman Reigns or somebody along those lines. And I looked to my wife the other day, and of course we have our 4-month-old, and she's been dealing with him all day, and like her hair is all messy and all over the place and completely exhausted. And kudos to her, and shout out to you, sweetheart. I tell her, so SmackDown, come into the Capital One Arena. We can get a little family group together and go watch. This will be Nathaniel's introduction to pro wrestling. She looks at me, gives me the look, quote unquote. And she's like, yeah, have fun with your friend Ken. I'll see you after you get back that night. I'm like, okay, thank you. Good to know.
Sometimes it's easier that way. You throw out the invite and you hope they just turn it down and say you can still go. That's what you do. You just hope. You hope that they're all right. Oh, why don't you go and then I'll see you later. Oh, okay, honey. We'll do it later.
You told me it's okay, so I'm just going to go with it. I will say there is something to be said for it's better to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission.
And absolutely.
Especially this time of year, like this week, 2 days away from Valentine's Day, because if that backfires, you still got Valentine's Day to save your ass.
You can still make up for it. That's right. You can still make up for it. That's a good call.
So that's the lowered expectations advice that you were hoping to catch here on Shoot the Gap. Hopefully it comes in handy. Hopefully, however, you do not find yourself in that scenario. But if you do, again, another thing you could ask JT or myself about at JT Orange, at Jorge B. Edwards, along with, IDP Fantasy Football or any type of fantasy football discussion. Folks, again, if you are, regulars of ours, or you're just tuning in, you listen or watch today's show, or I should say you've watched today's show, or you want to hear parts of it on your drive to and from wherever it is you're going, you can now listen to us exclusively wherever you listen to podcasts. You just look for the Shoot the Gap podcast, subscribe, let us know what you think. Give us your reviews. Be honest. Let us know. Are we talking too much about Valentine's Day and pro wrestling and eating and all sorts of stuff, or are we we're covering the bases and you're enjoying it and having fun along the way? We want to know.
Sometimes this happens when you're the late show, right? Jorge, sometimes we get a little off the rails. It happens, and we haven't been on in a while, so we're catching up on some things.
Yeah, this is true. And I did grab a beer out of the mini fridge, and I've been drinking most of it, and I'm like, damn, this feels pretty good. Let me look right into it more, and it's like 6%. I'm like, oh,
nice.
That's why. Okay, so we're climbing up the percent alcohol scale right here. So where this can go from now, people, I have no idea.
Hey, but we're only good times from here on out.
Let's see here. I'll make a note to not take relationship advice from you guys. Probably the better idea.
That is probably true. That is probably true for me. Way too many leagues, way too many sports. Sometimes I look at it, I'm like, man, how are you guys not like watching all this stuff? And they're like, my wife would kill me. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's probably true. watch way too many sports. My whole life is revolved around sports and our restaurant work brewery schedule. So I'm used to it, but I realize a lot of times other people are like, whoa, dude, you're living a crazy world. My wife would never let that happen. I'm like, oh, I guess you're right. So I understand. My girlfriend is pretty nice about it most of the time. She understands. So, but
I try to spend most of my life being a smartass and getting just to the point where I'm in trouble, but not where it's irrecoverable.
There you go. You want her to be like, you give you a smirk, maybe give you a look and kind of say something under her breath, but you don't want her to be like legit mad.
Right, exactly. That's where we're going with it. Angie here in the chat. Welcome back, Angie. To Shoot the Gap on the rails is highly overrated.
True.
Thank you.
Angie's right. Angie's right. Sometimes you just got to go off the rails. These things happen.
All right, so let's get into some tidbits here about IDP Dynasty startups. A lot can vary depending on the time of year you do your drafts. On last show on Dynasty 365, I was one of the proponents for just a regular offensive skill player or offensive player only. I like to have my startup before the NFL draft and my rookie draft after the NFL draft. But there was a counterpoint made that, some people like to have their startup drafts after the NFL drafts once rookies have already been inserted into the ADP there. I'm curious, what side of the coin do you lean here, JT? Would you rather have your startup before the NFL draft or after the NFL draft?
So I've been in leagues that do both, and I'm gonna give you a horror story about when you do it before. So
Right.
I did a before Dynasty startup last year, before the NFL draft happened. We actually had rookies involved in the draft as well. They didn't even wait and have a rookie draft later. So things got real wild because it's like you're trying to figure out where to take rookies. You had no idea what team they were going to be on. Some of these guys, you didn't even know where they're going to be drafted. I mean, we can guess. We have, a ton of people that cover the league, and you can think that a guy's going to go somewhere, and then they don't. I mean, we've seen guys like, oh, this guy's a first round quarterback. We hear all the buzz, and then he goes in the fourth round. You're like, what the hell just happened? Same thing with running backs, everybody else. So the horror story was I did one with, and I took Justin Fields. And this is pre like them taking Caleb Williams, knowing he was going to get traded, where he was going to trade it, what was going to happen. And it was a super flex. I was at the end of the first round. I'd convinced myself I was going to wait on QB, and then everyone hammered QB. And I got real nervous because I was at the end of the round. And I was like, oh man, if it goes to the corner and it gets all the way back to me at the end of the third and beginning of the fourth, I mean, I could be really in trouble here at QB. I end up taking Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. And then a month or two later, Justin Fields gets traded to the Steelers. They're signing Russell Wilson. And I'm like, that was my number 2 pick in a startup draft is now a backup quarterback. I'm like, holy shit. So that's where it can go wrong. That's when it can go real, real wrong. So I've done it, and it definitely can make things interesting. There's a lot where you can win and lose. Here's where I think you can win. If you are someone who covers rookies a lot, watches a lot of college football, you can get steals on the rookie side because it'll be the cheapest you ever get them, is in a startup like that, where they're mixed in with all the regular starters, our regular players, because people are nervous to take a guy not knowing where he's going to go. And again, you can hit or miss on that. Sean Tucker is a perfect example of that. I was a huge Sean Tucker guy coming out. Well, he ends up having all the pre-draft problems, issues, ends up going undrafted. And if you would have looked at mock drafts before that season, before the heart issue, before everything came out and he didn't go to the combine, blah, 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 he was a mid-first, late-first rookie mock draft. Like he was going in mock drafts like 1.5 to like 112. And then didn't get drafted at all.
Right.
In the NFL draft, and was undrafted free agent. And all of a sudden you're like, no one's even taking this guy in a startup. Like, oh my God. So if you had taken him, you're like, oh, I am screwed right now. So those are where it can get crazy. It definitely get off the rails. I prefer, because I kind of want to know what's happening even though I feel like I'm kind of in the know on a lot of things, I have a little advantage over some people. I want to wait till after the rookie draft, and even then, I'm a big fan
Yeah,
of.
NFL
I'm a big
draft.
fan of. Yes, NFL draft. I'm wait for the NFL draft, then have your rookie draft. I'm a big fan of that. I want to do the startup after that, then have a second rookie draft. I always, man, I feel like the values are so wild in a startup draft when the rookies are included.
Right.
And it's even more so if you do it before, but afterwards, I prefer. That was my long ass answer. I prefer. I prefer to go after the NFL draft. I want to know who's going to start, who free agents got signed. Because again, you could go in like perfect example. You go into a startup right now. What do you do with Sam Darnold? If you do a startup draft tomorrow, you have no idea what's happening with Sam Darnold. Is he a
Right.
starter? Is he not a starter? What team is he going to? Is he getting a 1-year deal? Is he going to a 2-year deal? Is he getting signed by the Raiders? And then the Raiders are drafting a quarterback anyway, and he's going
Sure.
to be out. And I mean, there's so many of those guys. Now that becomes risk reward. How many new guys in the league are gamblers? They're like, I'm willing to take the shot at him, and then other guys are like, I'll just let him drop. So it definitely depends on how you want to look at those things. But man, it makes a huge difference. You wouldn't think it would make that big of a difference, but I think it makes a gigantic difference. I prefer later. I just want to have absolutely the most amount of information I can on every player and every team and what they're doing, especially in a startup, because I'm one of those guys. I don't know how you are, Roy. I hate to drop leagues. I really do. I'm just one of those people. I'm a loyal person. I just always feel bad dropping out of a league. I don't want to jack up a team and then be like, and I'm not one of those people. If I jack up a team, I'm just going to drop out of the league. I would never do that.
Right.
I'm going to fight my way back with that team. But I believe me, I was looking at that team this offseason like, oh, Justin Fields is my number 2 QB at a super flex. I'm totally screwed. Like, I looked at that team and I ended up having to make a bunch of trades. Lawrence got hurt. He got benched. I ended up having to trade for Sam Darnold. I had to start making moves everywhere in that league because I had no quarterback. Shocker by the end of the season.
That's hilarious. I to answer the question, I prefer to have my startup, non-rookie, just the regular veteran draft prior to the NFL draft because I know more of what that landscape is like. To be a little bit more specific, I like having that done after free agency starts. So between free agency and the NFL draft, free agency can dictate a lot in terms of a player's value on a team going forward. Doing it before the NFL draft, that is like the people who have like the ultimate quote unquote medal out there are those who are doing startups with rookie drafts, like legit for real now, before even the NFL combine, who are like, I am so sure XYZ is going to not get injured, perform well, have a great pro day, be better than everybody else, gets drafted to the perfect, like the, oh my God, I can't even begin to describe like how much that does not excite me at all and would probably scare me to death to
So
do.
many variables. So
There
many
are.
variables are up in the air. It's actually like thinking about it. Just you talking about it is like it's stressful. You're like, oh my God.
Yeah, man. No, I hear you, but right there after free agency, but before the NFL draft, I like having the startup. Um, whether it's offense only, IDP only, offense and IDP, that's where I'm comfortable with, and then having the rookie draft be after the NFL draft because now I can assess more value, really hone in on the rookies there without having to worry about how veterans fit into the mix there. But again, folks, you could have different ways of doing things, different different reasons, and that's fine. That's fine. We're not here to tell you what's the right way to do it. We're just telling you that there are different ways to do it and the ways that we enjoy doing it, and maybe you'll enjoy doing it that way too. But with every single creation of a new league, JT, I don't know about you, but for me, I find it's very, very important to draft a league set of rules or constitution. One of my buddies, a longtime friend, like practically a brother, Jeremy Noble, he is an attorney during the day. Well, I guess he's an attorney 24/7. But in our home league, I brought up the notion of creating a league constitution because year after year there's always the gray areas, and I'm just like, this is crazy. Let's have a predetermined set of rules. So this guy like legitimately like drafted like a legal template of like, this is how league is going to operate under these conditions, sub conditions. And I'm reading this, I'm like, this is the most brilliant thing ever. So by the way, folks, if you want something like that for your league, reach out to me, Jorge at fantasyandframes.com or at Jorge B. Edwards on X, and I will make sure that we can tailor one to your specificity. But that being the case, I think having a constitution or set of rules ahead of time just it makes it so much easier without having to deal with all the BS that comes with uncertainty. Would you agree?
100%. My biggest mistake as a commissioner of 15, 20 plus years in fantasy football, not having the league rules written down. All my friends would have like live draft. I would tell everybody the rules. We kind of would talk about it, and then we'd have votes and it didn't have it like printed out anywhere set. And then everybody would fight me on it. Usually it was like one or two guys, but like having the league rules set, if you play on Sleeper, being able to have that where it's like you can pin it is like the best thing ever, where you can pin like a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet or wherever you can do on that. Absolutely do that. That's one of the big things I'm working on this off season already is cleaning up my leagues, because I've had a lot of leagues for a long time and I've let like stuff slide. And I'm like, oh, all right, it's time to get back in, like really lock it down. So I'm going through all my league rules, updating everything because we've changed stuff over the years. Payout structure, playoff structure, who gets in? Is it points? Is it record? We've made adjustments over the years, but then, you get people who are like, I don't remember that change, blah, blah. So that's one of the big things. That one is huge for me. And then accounting. Getting an Excel spreadsheet with accounting set up and marking in where everybody pays, how they paid, when they paid you. The amount of money would probably make me sick if I could actually add it up, of the money I've eaten as a commissioner over the years of people who haven't paid me. And I'm the type of person like, I'm going to pay out people because I run the league. That's my bad. I'm going to pay you out. If I have to eat the extra money, then I just have to eat it. I've been very, very bad about that. John McGlynn, our good friend here, who runs the Dynasty evaluation, he always has someone in the league be the secretary who kind of handles all that, gets the money, pays it out, collects it. Great idea. If you can talk somebody as the commish, talk somebody else in the league to help you do that. Fantastic idea. I wish I could get somebody to do that in my leagues. I haven't had anyone volunteer yet to do that. But one of the big things I've done this offseason, I told John and asked other people, I was like, hey, send me a link of how you do your collections, your league rules, and then I've been going through and trying to adjust those and then save those and pin them, whether it's you're on a group me, you're on Sleeper, you're on a group chat, however you do your league. I've been trying to update those things because those have been two of my absolute monster headaches, is not having everything written down in stone. So then people want to fight you when something happens and you don't have it right there in front of you to just send it to them. It's a problem. It ends up being a huge problem. And then just the money. If you're a commish, I mean, obviously no one wants to just lose money because people aren't paying you. So that's one of those things. Both those things have been high on my priority list this off season, is to clean that stuff up and make sure everything's updated.
100%. You briefly mentioned, you mentioned money. And so one thing, people, that's out there is a place called, I think, leaguesafe.com. That's another place you can go. There is like a fee you have to pay. But for peace of mind, that fee may be something that you are happy eating.
If you're on Fantrax, I was going to say this, Jorge, if you're on Fantrax, they do have like a collection pot that saves the money and pays out on Fantrax. It's
Huh.
nice if you have it. This is something I've just become aware of lately. So that's nice when it just holds it in a thing and gives it to you. So it's not a third party site. It just holds it in your Fantrax account.
Right.
So if you're on Fantrax, really nice for there. League Safe. I'm in a ton of leagues that use League Safe. You do have to pay a fee, but it is much more convenient. You can see everyone who's paid, everyone who hasn't paid. If you need to pay in the future, you have it right there set up. It's a great tool. Part of the reason I will be honest, part of the reason I got burned was I did a lot of in-person drafts. And if somebody didn't show up and give me the money at the in-person draft or sent like someone to draft for them or whatever, then it was my bad because I didn't have a good system of like setting up to make sure I went and got money from that person later. So,
Right.
and then I got into the bad habit of not letting, I got in the bad habit of letting people not pay till the end of the season.
Mm.
So I got in a bad habit of like people didn't pay me at the draft. I just like, okay, I'll get it from you later. And then trying to run people down at the end of the year when everyone now wants paid. I end up having to pay them out and then run that person down separately because everyone's mad when they're holding out. So League Safe, like you said, I think there's a couple other out there. It's a really nice thing, especially if you're playing with leagues online or people that you don't personally know. But I also would say most my home leagues that I run are mostly people I know, and that ends up being worse sometimes because they're like, "Oh, I'll get you," and it's not that they're intentionally trying to steal from you. They just a lot of people think they're going to see you later. I'll get you when I next time I see you, and then people get busy, and then they're like, "Oh, didn't I pay you?" And you're like, "No, you didn't." They're like, "I think I did," and then you have that argument of,
Yeah.
"Did you? Did you not?" They think they did. So just to save
Yeah.
yourself the headache, just figure out an accounting system. That's why I said a lot of my guys, I have a couple leagues I run on League Safe, especially with one of the guys that live out of state. I run it just it's made it easier over the years. But I've set up a new like Excel spreadsheet where like as soon as you pay me, I mark it so then I know I can go back in my phone, find it where you paid me, what date you paid me. And then I can go back and tell you, yes, you did pay for this year. Or, you always get in the big situation of like rolling over money. Oh, I won. Can you take out my league for next year? Well, if you don't have a good system to set that up, you're
Yeah.
like, oh, you need your $100 for this year. They're like, oh, I won last year. You were supposed to take it out. And you're like, I take that out? What? No, did I pay you it or did I take it out? So just learn from me. I've messed this up plenty over the years. So just get yourself a good system, whatever system works for you, Jorge. Whether that's League Safe, whether it's subbing an Excel spreadsheet, whether it's finding a secretary to handle it in your league. I just think if you can find something and stick with it, it's better. And that's been a big problem for me is I've not been consistent through every league what I'm doing. And then I get confused. I'm like, because you're like me, probably, I'm sure. You have a bunch of people playing a bunch of leagues with you. So then you get confused, like, oh, was that money for this league or was that money for that league? Like, oh, would you pay in? Would you not pay in? So, and again, those things are what drain the fun out of fantasy football. To be honest with you, you're messing with money, messing with like, oh, I did this, I didn't do this. It just ruins the fun of fantasy football.
No, totally agree. Let's get into some more. Let's get into something a little bit more specific to just IDP versus just general, dynasty, blah blah, or information as I like to call it. Let's talk about you're in your dynasty startup draft. How do you approach your strategy as far as do you like to go draft younger, older, especially in IDP? Because we know in IDP, unlike in offense only leagues, like player longevity has increased, over the years so that you can find a 30-year-old plus linebacker a la Bobby Wagner who is still cranking out tackle after tackle after tackle, even though he's after his so-called prime. Um, you know, does that sway you, age at all in your startups, or does that play a factor for you?
For me, when it comes to age and where I'm looking at age, I'm drafting younger players early, making sure I'm getting those guys. I'm not, especially on the defensive side, the IDP side, I'm not as age adverse as I am on offense, maybe. But I also feel like you can get some of those older IDP guys later. So I don't feel like I've got as much draft capital in them. So it's a little less scary to take them if I'm taking them like mid to late rounds as opposed to taking them really early. Um, and then I also think it just comes on to strategy. I've had leagues where I think I'm like, I'm going to go into this draft like win now. And then I start seeing the way the board's falling, and I'm like, I guess I'm not. I'm going to take a bunch of young guys and build young. And then I've had other leagues where I'm like, dude, I'm going to just take everybody young. I'm just going to take a super young team and build. And then I see the draft board dropping it, and I'm like, well, nope. I guess I'm taking a win now approach. Because sometimes, and I think that sometimes is important. Like, have an idea of what you want to do going in, and then be able to adjust once the draft happens. Especially, I know Jamie brought it up earlier. I was going to show this one. He was talking about auction leagues. He said they're more his jam these days. Brings makes the total player value even for everybody. That's a big one. Auction leagues, you have to be on your toes. It's so much harder to figure out who's going to do what and what guys end up going for way more. Auction leagues are just a whole nother beast. And I did my original startup big money IDP league auction because of that reason. We just want everybody to be like, hey, I don't have advantage because I randomly pulled the pick 1 or pick 12. We just like did auction. Now, if you're doing a full IDP auction league, I will tell you that takes a ton of time. So be ready. You got to have a whole day. Yeah, I mean, you need like a good 6-hour day to do that. But for me, I'm more likely to take older players on the IDP side because I still think you can get production out of those guys. And then I don't think you're usually investing as much. So if you have to bail on them after 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, it's a little different than if you're like, oh, I took a QB at the top of the draft and now I'm like 2 years into my dynasty league and my QB is like falling apart on me. It's easier to replace a linebacker than as a quarterback. So I don't mind taking those Bobby Wagner types, like you said. I don't mind grabbing like a CJ Mosley, even though he got injured and had a down year this year. And part of the reason that is it is on offense, depending on how deep your league is, people will really stack backups, quarterbacks, running backs. They'll make sure they're getting guys in case somebody gets hurt, they get replaced. People really don't do that on the IDP side. So people that went out and got replacements for guys that got hurt on IDP, very rarely are people stashing their backup in case they got hurt on the IDP side. So the good thing is if you're paying attention, a lot of times you can still go out and get those other players if those guys go down. Does that make sense to you at all?
Nope, totally get it. Now let's talk about positional targeting. In a redraft versus a dynasty league, and let's assume we're talking about balanced scoring, and we can get into big play, balanced scoring, tackle heavy. Let's just talk about balanced scoring, where everybody has the potential to match each other in fantasy points given the plays that they make on the field. In your startup league, do you carry over some redraft principles in terms of which positions you like to draft earlier, or does it not really matter to you? Do you carry over some of your principles from redraft in terms of like, I want to get my defensive linemen first and linebackers and DBs last, or do you want to go after, the linebackers or defensive linemen or DB? Like, what is your take? Is there similarity or is there some difference that people should take into account when they're starting their IDP startups?
The biggest thing for me, and I think it matters in every league, let's be honest, the scoring setup matters in every league, but I think it matters more in IDP leagues. Because if you're getting 1 point per sack, that's a monster difference than if you're getting 4 or 6 points per sack. If you're getting a point per tackle or you're getting 2 points per tackle and a point and a half for an assist, huge difference on the IDP side. So for me, that's the number one thing I want to look at if I'm in a startup new IDP league. I want to look at the scoring and figure out, because if I'm in a league that sacks are a high scoring number, I'm going to definitely look at getting defensive ends early. I want to give myself to have the best chance, especially if you get like a sack, fumble, recovery. If those numbers are huge, I want to give myself a chance of having big number from that guy. Now, I was in a startup this last year that was like damn near 1 point across the board for anything and everything IDP. Well, at that point, I was just taking whatever defensive ends dropped because I was like, I want linebackers. I want safeties that get tackles. Because if you're telling me a sack, which, having a monster year in sacks is 20,
Right.
having an average year in tackles is 75. A monster year in tackles is 150, 175. Give me the guy that gets the tackles. I'm just gonna ignore linebacker until later. So those are the big ones for me. Scoring. If it's all even, I look at scarcity and how your league does it. And this is what Jorge. And the reason I'm a little hesitant is like we always talk about this. There is no like kind of standard IDP. So
Right.
like if a guy is a DN or an outside, like TJ Watt's a great example. If TJ Watt's a defensive end in a league, I'm definitely going to prioritize taking TJ Watt earlier. If he's considered a linebacker in one of my leagues, he's down on my list. He's going to fall for me because I want an off the ball tackle linebacker at that point. So that's why I say positional, what you do positional and what you do scoring wise, which always makes IDP a little more difficult, which scares people away sometimes. That adjusts the position for me. It really does. The scoring, if all things are considered even as far as like, hey, it's pretty like, hey, sacks are worth a little bit, like a decent amount more than tackles, turnovers, interceptions worth amount. I'm probably looking high end defensive ends and linebackers first is probably where I'm looking because you got the scarcity of the defensive ends. You can usually find more guys that get tackles. So I'm not as high on the linebackers. If it's the opposite, sacks are counting 2 or less. I want to high prioritize huge tackle guys on defense. And then turnovers, another one. Passes defense. Everybody's usually don't take DBs. Me and you are the only two that are always like backing DBs. They're always passing on DBs, and I think it is smart to not take them super early. Wait on those guys. But the tackle numbers and then the takeaway numbers, passes defensed, interceptions, pick sixes. Do you get bonuses? Do you get return yards for interceptions? Is a monster one. If you get return yards for interceptions, that always pushes defenders up for me a little bit. If you don't, a cornerback.
Right.
I mean, they're so similar, and year to year, you're never going to figure it out. So those guys are the guys that are going to drop for me. So I'm always like, scarcity of position is the first thing I want to look at. DN, D tackle, linebacker, safety, cornerback. I want to look at scarcity of position of the top end guys. I want to prioritize those guys first. After that, if it's a big, deep, say inside linebacker is a huge swath of 25, 40 guys, I want to go DN first. But I don't want to go with DN first if I'm only getting a point per sack. Like at that point, give me every linebacker I can take, starter and backup, and then I'll fill in with defensive ends.
Right. I mean, the scoring for these big plays has to be something that's 3 points or higher. If you're giving me 3 or 4 points for a sack, then yeah, I'm prioritizing whether it's in my startup or my rookie. I'm going defensive lineman, like edge rusher specifically.
Yep.
If you're only giving me, like you said, like a sack for a point for a sack, give me the linebacker, give me the off-ball linebackers, give me the box safeties or the people who are projected to play box safeties. I'd even go that far because I love my defensive backs. So again, something to consider in terms of like your strategies and how you approach things, which I think from what you're saying is very comparable to what you would do in a redraft scenario. So there is some parallel to that there. You brought up
Jorge, I was going to say, like you made a good point there. I think IDP, you can look at it redraft a little more like a redraft style than offense. I think you could go in a startup. You really want to focus on those younger offensive players. But once you get to defense, you almost want to transition your mind to almost more of a redraft format on defense, I think. Outside of taking like the Will Andersons and some of those guys early, the Micah Parsons, if you miss out on those handful of like top end, super young, high end defensive guys, I really do think you need to get that more of a, when you go to start drafting your defensive players, I think a redraft mindset actually is probably going to do you a little better in a startup. What do you think about that?
I think there is some truth to that, and I think the reason there is that is the fact that there is longer shelf life for IDPs, for defensive players in general, that can still be productive for you for fantasy purposes than you would have on offense. Like on offense, you hear about 29 years and older, running backs, start to fall off, wide receivers start to fall off. You better get those guys young. You better get them in their early 20s, or else, what are you doing? Versus a linebacker, it's like, I'll take a linebacker from when they're 22, 21 to again, in their early 30s. Like it just, there isn't as much of an age scarcity issue for IDP in terms of startups, in terms of draft value there, than you would find. So I think you're right. There is a lot of similarity there between the two. Now, we talked about, formats. We talked about, the league constitution, the similarities between redraft and dynasty. We mentioned, let's talk about, we talked about age. Let's talk about recency bias and performance. When you're trying to assess in a startup, no rookies, you have a rookie draft afterwards. We'll get to rookie drafts a little bit later. When you have your startup, what do you look for in terms of like valuing players? Are you looking at players who had, let's say, players who are going to be second-year players this year? Do you look at their 1 year sample and kind of bump them up in terms of like, I want to get on this train before it takes off? Or do you kind of say, you know what, let me go with people who've had more of a longer track record for your IDP startup drafts?
Yeah, usually for me, IDP side, I want to go a little bit more of a stronger track record because I want to get consistent scoring out of my IDP. I'm not, if you have a monster week out of a guy, that's awesome. But those are, few and far between on IDP side, where the guy has a 25, 30-point game, or whether he can get me 10 every week. So I'm looking for consistency first. I want the consistency on the IDP side. One guy's going to give me solid points. The one thing I do want to look for in a startup, and if you hadn't played IDP before, it might be a little more difficult to kind of navigate this strategy. But what I want to do is I want to look at guys that were supposed to be absolute studs who had okay seasons, but they didn't live up to expectation. Those are guys I want to look for. And one of the guys, I'll give you an example. One of the guys I would think is Nick Bolton for the Chiefs. Now, I'm a big Nick Bolton fan. He was going pretty high the last 2 years. He's had a little bit injury concerns, didn't get all the boomer bust plays this year that he's had the last couple years. So did he have a bad year? Absolutely not. Did he have the year where he was getting drafted in most circumstances for IDB? No, he was down. So he considered to have a down year. So those are the guys I want to look at. Like, oh, I like him. I think he's going to be good. There's going to be people down on him because he didn't have as good of a year last year. And they're going to have a little bit of that hate because they're like, oh, I took him as my LB1. And damn it, he didn't play he was like my LB4, and then he ended up being LB25 in my league. And I thought he was going to be in the top 5. Those are guys I want to kind of look at. Maybe guys that I still think have talent. I don't think are washed by any means, but maybe didn't have the numbers because they either got nicked up with injury or just, had a slightly bad year, because that happens on IDP side. We see guys like have dips where they have a year where it's like, that wasn't a great year, but then they bounce back when they have a big year the next year. So I want to look at those guys and see if there's some people falling that they necessarily shouldn't be, or we talk about all the time, guys that were overdrafted the year before. Do I look at it and take them when they actually probably should have been drafted? Do they fall back to reality the next year and be like, oh, I'm in a new startup. I'm going to look for this guy because he was overdrafted last year. So now he's getting more hate than he probably shouldn't have just because he didn't perform because the expectations were way too high. I mean, another guy I think about that, like Amika Fitzpatrick, a guy who's had some really good years, but then basically was playing deep safety for the Steelers most this year and had zero in back plays. Really was, if you took his name and just put Joe Blow as his name, like he would have been right in the middle of, I can't remember he finished, but he was like in the 60s in DBs. It was like not even close. So, dude, maybe look at a guy like that if you think he has a bounce back year. But again, like also keep an eye on and be like, man, he wasn't great last year. He's on my radar, but I'm going to wait till he gets to exactly where I feel like is a good spot to take him as opposed to maybe reaching on him. And if somebody in your other league is like, oh, they bite on the name, be cool with it. Let them bite on the name. Let them take the guy. You go and get, Jalen Petrie or somebody else who also maybe didn't have as very good of a year either compared to what they was expected. But when you look at them, stats wise, they were like pretty identical last year. So, if you can wait and get that guy 4 or 5 rounds later because of name recognition, I'm all about that. And I'm like everybody else. There's sometimes you just want a guy because you're a sucker and you're like, oh, I love that player. Sometimes you just got to be like willing to let that guy go and get a guy that's not as big of a name, but in reality, fantasy wise, is pretty comparable production wise.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Let's talk about for Dynasty the importance of age on roster construction. We know on offense that we like to get more of a younger situation in terms of the players we have, just because we want to have that short to long term success in foundation going forward. Do you think it matters as much with IDP because of the longevity, or do you still like to get your young guys in there and have them be predominantly young guys on your team?
For IDP purposes, I'm not as worried about how young my defense is. I'm way more concerned about my offense age. Defense, because here's the other thing. Unless guys hit right off the bat on defense, there's a lot of times guys, they got to kind of build up on the defensive side. They'll get some playing time, they'll get some stuff. Year 2, 3, they know the system. They start seeing full-time reps. So there's a lot of times you see guys are, second, third rounders in the NFL draft that don't see like full-time starts till year 2 or 3. Keep those guys on your radar, but I'm not like absolutely enamored with having those guys on my roster. I look at those guys and go, how many other guys in my league are going to know about him? And how many other guys in my league are probably going to pick him up? If it's a low percentage, I'm like, leave them on the waiver if you don't have room on your team, and then go get them later if you can. I tell you what, one of my favorite strategies, I know I'm going a little off topic here. One of my favorite strategies is if you're during the off season of IDP League, if you have like a fab where you can, you guys every Wednesday or however your league does it. I have leagues that do it once a month. That's where I want to go get those guys. I want to get like that second, third year young guy that might be moving up the depth chart. I want to pick him up for $1. If especially in my leagues, I expand my leagues roster in the off season to give people rooms to move guys around, to do different things. That's where I go grab those guys. Cause you know what? I $3, $4, $5 and fab on them. And then if they bail out, we get to the beginning of the year and they get beat out by a veteran or they just don't quite make that jump. I don't have that much in them. I can drop them. Right. But I have absolutely crushed in some leagues by getting those guys in like June. And then everybody wants to go get them once the season hits. And they're like, oh, I didn't know somebody had him on his team because I went and got those guys early before everybody else kind of knew their names or before they could work their way up the depth chart. That's my favorite time to grab those guys is in the summer free agent fab. Because again, I'll spend more money than most people will. And maybe they say, a lot of people want to save their money for the season. But IDP wise, I have no problem spending money in the summer because I want to get those guys early, see if they hit. And if they don't hit, I just drop them. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I'll come back and pick them up next year. If I need the roster spot, I just drop them and pick somebody else up. So I'm not as worried about age. I always am keeping an eye on guys, but I'm more worried about taking guys that are good on perform. I want guys I know, even if I only get 1 year out of you on IDP side. Okay, you gave me stats that year. I'm looking in the future for younger guys. So to me, age is not, unless you're taking those high, like I said, unless you're taking a Micah Parsons or a Will Anderson, they're like one of the first IDPs off the board, and you're expecting to get that guy for 10 years. I like those guys. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't take those guys. But if I miss on those guys, I'm willing to just sit back and wait a little longer and just take guys that are a little bit older. Junior Colston. That's sorry, I know I'm going on rants here. Junior Colston was a guy I loved last year as a rookie. Injured, never fully got in there. To me, he's a complete buy this offseason. There's a chance people dropped him. He's not on anybody's rosters anymore. Or even if he's on somebody's roster, they're just not super pumped about him. Like, maybe go get a guy like that, because I still believe in him. It just didn't work out last year. I thought he would be the rookie of the year. He had injuries. He just never really fully made it in the system. I still believe in the talent. So he's a guy, like, if someone dropped him off, like before the season was over or whatever, and he's on waivers, that's one of the first guys I'm going to grab. I want to get a guy like that it just wasn't great last year, but it's still young. That's where my focus is, on the young guys. Can I get him cheap? Can I get somebody that people are overlooking? I would rather spend my money on a startup draft. I'd rather get Bobby Wagner and just go, like, I know he's going to get me 8 to 12 points every game. He's not flashy. He's not a sexy pick, but man, he's just going to get me points. And that's what I want on my defense. I just want steady Eddie points.
All right. So far we've covered redraft and dynasty similarities, age, recency bias, drafting for value, positional scarcity, depending on your scoring format. That can vary a lot, and age and its impact on roster construction. But you know what? We haven't talked about something a little bit more basic, and that is, what type of roster construction do you like? So, for example, for me, my favorite type of IDP league, and again, this can differ from yours, and kudos to you. I have in one league that I participate in where it's IDP only dynasty. You start 3 defensive, and it's a 3-position designation league. It's on sleeper. So I'll have 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, 3 defensive backs, 2 flexes, and then I will have about 8 bench spots, 3 IR spots, 3 taxi squad spots. There you go. There's plenty of spots right there. You have coverage in case, your team gets hurt on IR, you get decimated. This past year, my linebackers were getting decimated left and right. I needed to drop some players and hope that nobody else picked them up. It was a bad year for injuries for IDP. On the flip side, well, no, there is no flip side. Yeah, that's kind of what I look for in terms of the roster construction there. That's what I find. And of course, there are ways you can kind of manipulate how that can work to your favor. So let's say, for example, you have the 3 defensive lineman leagues. Well, what if you have, players on your roster that are dual eligible? Well, that shifts the entire, idea of like what you got going on. So do you have, 3 defensive linemen, or do you swap in somebody into your first linebacker spot who's also a defensive lineman, and you have 4 defensive linemen? So I like having enough players where I can kind of reap the rewards of something like dual eligibility. But for the most part, I like to roll in 3s. It's a good number. Holy Trinity, all that jazz. You can call it the Holy Trinity of IDP if you want. Yeah, so that's what I like to do. 3 of each position, and then 2 flexes, 8 bench, 3 taxi, 3 IR. What about you, JT?
Yeah, if I'm playing on sleeper, I really like that setup. I like what you're saying there. 3 D linemen, 3 linebackers, 3 DBs. Definitely the dual eligibility on sleeper is nice for that. When you guys, especially for bye weeks and injuries, you get some of those guys that can play DN, D line, or linebacker is super nice. I like that a lot. I was going to say the one main mistake I see people make when they start an IDP league or do their first every year doing an IDP league, they don't have enough IDP spots. They want to do it and be like, oh, well, we don't really know it well. Let's do a dynasty startup. Let's do IDP, but let's do like 3 IDP spots or like 4 IDP spots. Do not make that mistake. I know you think like, oh, you're easing people in is going to make it easier because you can all just take the big names. It's a terrible mistake. It ruins IDP. And the reason I say this is because it makes it less relevant. When there's that many guys on the waiver wire and you can literally just pick up and drop guys on a whim, what ends up happening is you can do it, but no one's going to value IDP guys. They're not going to trade for them. They're not going to draft them in rookie drafts. They're just you're just basically diluting the value of IDP. And I've seen it in a couple leagues, and every league I've ever been in that started out with a number like 4 or less has almost always folded or just completely dropped IDP. They turn around and be like, never mind, let's just not do IDP because it's just not enough guys. It waters it down too much. I saw that in honestly, my original home league, we have added IDP positions over the years, over the last 15 years, and I've upped the scoring on a consistent basis. I didn't do it right away because I gave people notice like, hey, we're going to start upping this scoring. So you might want to start paying attention to defense more because I found a very bad trend in one of my home leagues where people were just ignoring IDP. They were literally week to week, they would have whatever amount of guys they had to have to fill a starting lineup and then just grabbing guys off a waiver because it was not that much of a difference. You don't want that. You want to have value where guys can be traded. Well, the guys can be drafted. And so I always think make sure you're evening things out enough that those guys are wild and have enough positions. I love your idea of 3-3 with 2 flex. Love that for sleeper. I suggest people, if you're playing on My Fantasy League or Reality Sports Online, I have a bunch of IDP leagues on both those sites. If you're playing on those types of sites, I suggest adding in a defensive tackle and a cornerback. If you're going to do that, it just expands it a little more. And then if you can add in, it's hard to do on the sleeper side just because they do basically D-line, linebacker, DB. So it's harder to do on that side. So but on Reality Sports Online and My Fantasy League, you can actually up defensive tackle and cornerback stats to make them more valuable, which I always love because I want a guy like Aaron Donald in a sleeper league. He should be a guy that was always on team anyway, just because his sack potential and everything else. But if you play in a league where you have defensive tackle starter, he becomes someone you really are going after. You want to go after that high end guy because it's like when you play a tight end premium and you have that number 1 tight end versus tight end 15. It's a big difference. Defensive tackle, I get that number 1 defensive tackle. Number 15 defensive tackle scoring me like 3 points a game. Like it's a monster difference. So I suggest if you're going to play on that, one of those 2 formats, in all the formats I play on that when I play IDP, that's how we do it. We play at least start 1 defensive tackle, start 1 cornerback. We do 2 D-line. We do either 2 or 3 linebackers, depending on the league I'm in. Some of them are 2, some are 3. And then we do 2 to 3 DBs and then 1 or 2 flexes. So it just kind of depends on how many start spots you want. But I think you have to be at least starting 8 defenders in an IDP league. If you're playing anything less than 8, I love Jorge. I love your not, even if you want to go 9 and go 3-3-3 with no flex, totally fine too. But the flex is nice to give you bye weeks, injuries, gives you a little more room depending on how big your lineup is. Because I'm in a couple sleeper leagues that didn't have flex, and it got real ugly because it was short benches. I had to drop guys on defense I didn't want to if they got hurt or had a bye week because the benches were so short. I didn't have room to hold guys. I had to drop them and lose guys I would never want to give up in a dynasty, but I had to. So that, you don't want to hamstring yourself there, but I always suggest defensive tackle, cornerback, if you're in a format that can do that, and then adjust the scoring. If you give 1.5 points for a defensive player tackle, give 2 points for a defensive tackle. give them just that little bump because those guys don't score as much. It makes it a little worthwhile. I think it's fun to do it that way. I just hammer it home. Do not have just a couple IDP spots. No one's gonna like it. It's gonna ruin the league. I know people are like scared about, I don't know that much about individual defenders. They'll learn something, but like it's gonna ruin the league if you don't have at least, I think, 8 to 11 IDP spots.
100% agree. Let's round out the show with let's create our ideal league here. If you, it'll be like a joint league between you and I. We'll be the co-commissioners,
right.
Starting up a Dynasty IDP League. Okay, what's the first thing we do? Well, we got to create rules for this league. So, based off of your experiences and any format of Dynasty, what is one rule that you are 100% putting on that list in your constitution that your league must have?
Yeah, the first thing would be the position limits. I would say, you got to have 8 starters on the IDP. But for me, I like a 10 and 10 or an 11 and 11. I like to go even. I like to go 10 offensive starters, 10 defense starters, or 11 and 11. That's what I prefer. But you have, to me, even if you want to go 10 offensive, because people feel more comfortable with like 10 offensive and 8 defensive, I'm cool with that. But I think you have to have 8 defensive spots. Like, to me, if I'm starting a league, I'm not starting a league unless I have at least 8 IDP spots.
Right. 100% agree. One rule that I am very strong of, opinion about, and it's for an IDP Dynasty startup, or if it's just for an offense only IDP startup, is no trade deadline. I hate trade deadlines. You play Dynasty Dynasty leagues are meant to be played 365. You're supposed to be making plays and trades and moves that better your roster for the short term or long term year round. I don't care if it's the fantasy playoffs. I don't care if it's the day of the fantasy championship. If I can make my team better and help secure that title, or maybe help increase my longevity being at the top, I want to be able to make that trade. Obviously, it goes without saying, nobody in their right mind is pro trade veto. I think that we can safely say we would never include that.
No trade veto.
No trade vetoing.
No trade vetoing.
Jorge,
to jump on your point there, I will have to say, I was, for a long time, I was pro no trade once the playoffs started. For a long time, I was pro no trade once the playoffs started. I have been in a couple leagues lately that had trades, and I actually liked it. Now, here's my caveat on that. Who are the players in your league? If it's guys like friends, like people people that are like stand-up dudes, I say no trade deadline. Here's where I go, I'm anti that. And this is because I've had a couple leagues fold because of this. People who jump into leagues, play leagues, go all out to win it, and then drop out of the league once they've just absolutely murdered their team to try to win a championship and all their future. So as long as you're not in like an online league with just all these guys that you don't know and people that have a history of like trying to win it and then bailing once they trade all their picks away, and then they either win it or fail to win it, and then they bail on the league because they're like, oh, well, my team sucks now and I just traded all these picks. I've had leagues fold because of that, and I never want to see leagues fold. Sometimes it happens. It's just part of the game. I hate to see leagues fold. I want to keep the integrity of the league. So to me, I think it's league to league based. I actually let my home leagues vote on that. And these are all guys I know personally, like guys I've known for years and years and years. So they're not going anywhere. And a couple of my leagues, they said, no, we just prefer once the playoff starts, no trading once the playoff. You can trade up to the week, but like the week of the playoffs. But once the playoffs start, no trading until all the players are done. I'm like, cool. If people are good with that, I took it to a vote. That was voted. We did that. But I do like the trading. I made a trade in Fantasy and Frames League this last year, right before the championship. I traded away Bucky Irving. I I got a first and I think 2 seconds for him. Like, it was a lot. It was a lot. But like, that was my point, was like, hey, if I'm giving up Bucky Irving and you're trying to win a title, you're going to have to overpay me a little bit. So
Right.
in that circumstances, I like that move. I like that idea. As long as you know people aren't just going to cut bait and run the second they trade all their future away, then I'm all for no trade deadline. So I will put that caveat. It's something I was 5 years ago. I was like, absolutely no freaking trades once the playoffs start. But now I'm like, I definitely see the benefits, especially if you're a young rebuilding team. It's a great chance for you to trade off some of those older assets that might get somebody a title and get you some more draft picks or some younger players. So, oh, know what the trade was? I got a first, a second, and Jonathan Brooks, who I also traded away from the same guy. It was Drew. I traded away to Drew at the beginning of the year. I traded him James Brooks after I drafted him, and then I traded back for James Brooks at the end of the season because at that point he was hurt. He's going to sit most of next year, but I have a young team. So for me, it was worth taking on a guy like that I can put on IR next year, and then I can wait on him because my team's probably 2 years out. I just barely missed the playoffs. You beat me. You beat me, Jorge. I'm going to give it to you. You beat me to make the playoffs. But my team is, could have gotten in the playoffs, but I wouldn't have won it. Just not enough. I just don't have enough points for my guys. But I'm a young building team. So for me, does it hurt to give up a Bucky Irving? Yes. But I got a first, a second, and a former first round pick that I can kind of keep building with my team. So I just wanted to point that out, that I was anti that, and I'm definitely starting to come around to no trade deadline as long as there's no worries about the integrity of the league folding or a bunch of people bailing. So I just wanted to give my rant on that.
So to piggyback off of that, one way you can ensure that not happening is depending on how many years you have draft picks laid out. Like if you have the next 3 years of draft picks available to make transactions with, you should be paying at the beginning of your league for every single year for those 3 years. So therefore,
Great
you are
point.
you're financially locked in to participating. And let's say you're paying $50 a year. You're dropping $150 right at the beginning. I'm staying. Like I just dropped $150. I'm in for the next 3 years. I'm not going anywhere. Some people might be like, screw that, I'm leaving. Or if you have lower buy-in entry numbers, costs rather, they may say, screw it, I'm still leaving. Well, the person who comes in, who walks in and has like 0 draft picks and has a disheveled roster, you could at least tell them you're covered for the next 3 years, or you're covered for the next 2 years. You don't have to worry about that. So you're giving them some kind of financial incentive there. Maybe throw in some extra fab dollars their way from from the commissioner being the one who gives the extra fab there. So that's
a great move. I agree with you on that 100%. That's a move I've seen other people make in my leagues the last couple of years. That's something I've stolen for my leagues. I love that idea. If you're trading future picks away, you got to pay for the season before. Because again, as a commish, man, when somebody buries their team, it's so hard to find an orphan, get somebody to fill that orphan. If you can tell somebody, hey, this next year's paid for, or the next 2 years are paid for, it is going to be a rebuild for you. But give that person that incentive. To me, that's great. So I agree 100% with you on that. That's something I never had thought about until I saw people do it in the last couple of years.
Very nice. All right. Well, that's going to cover, Dynasty IDP startup leagues. Again, I think the thing to take away here is that unlike in offense, you can really find some parallels here on in Dynasty startups for IDP in terms of redraft strategies in terms of drafting and assembling your roster here. There is more of a redraft field, especially for IDP leagues, given the longevity that these players are now having in terms of being fantasy assets for you in the later years of their playing career. And there are multiple ways to play. There are multiple strategies. Again, one of the things that makes it a little bit difficult to really give you a specific way to do things is that, and JT, you brought it up earlier, there is no default IDP scoring setting. So you really have to approach things from is it tackle heavy? Is it big play? Is it balanced? And what does that mean? So things to take into consideration. And of course, if you have any questions about setting up your IDP Dynasty League, or whether it's scoring or what have you, you can always reach out to us here on X at JT Orange, at Jorge B. Edwards. You can reach out to me at Jorge at fantasyandframes.com via email. JT, yours is JT Orange 4 at Gmail?
JT Orange 4 at Gmail. Yep. JT Orange 4, the number 4, JT Orange 4 at Gmail. And Jorge, I was going to jump on that. I was going to say, don't be afraid as a commish. If you start a league, you set it up, you play a year, don't be afraid to look at the scoring. This is something I always do as a commish. I go back and I relook at the scoring in all my IDP leagues and figure out where those guys finished and where, like, if I have one DB scoring 200 points and I have 45 linebackers scoring 200 points and 3 defensive ends scoring 200 points, then I'm like, okay, I need to adjust scoring. So don't be afraid to go in there and adjust scoring as your league grows and year to year to kind of even things out. I mean, I used to be in a league with no tight end premium, and I just showed guys, I was like, look how low the tight ends are scoring. And I'm like, we want these guys to be more valuable so they're not just throwaways. And so I think the big time on defense, don't be afraid to set up a league. If the scoring doesn't work after a year, you look at it and you're like, we don't have one IDP player in the top 150 in scoring, then you know you need to adjust your scoring. However you want to do that, whether that means more big play scoring, more tackle heavy, however you want to do that. Don't be afraid to make changes as a commish, because I think you always got to be working on your league, adjusting it, making it kind of make sure things fit. So that's a big thing I've done as a commish over the years in my IDP leagues, is I'm not afraid to slightly adjust scoring here and there to kind of make positions more even, or at least somewhat relevant. Because the worst thing you can have is have a position completely irrelevant, and then there's no point to even have those guys.
All right. So again, thank you very much for everybody who's tuned in. Next week, same time, 10 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to put out on Twitter, Facebook, and all our various social platforms a sleeper link to a 10-round, 12-team IDP startup, veterans only. JT and I will not be participating. We're just going to have all you IDP junkies and fanatics out there participating. And then come next week, this time, or at 10 p.m. Eastern, we're going to throw up the draft board. We're going to examine these teams. We're going to give you our thoughts on, like, we like this strategy, we don't like this strategy. We're going to tell you why. And kind of help give you some insight as far as like how to dissect a draft or your mock draft, so you can kind of get some valuable information out of them. JT, you mentioned earlier, a lot of people are like, mock drafts are stupid, I get nothing out of it. Well, some would say, who else said that? Allen Iverson, practice. What do I care about practice for? Well, you know what? There are a lot of other people who are like, yeah, I love practice. Practice helps me make me better. I tend to sit on that side of the coin. So why not break down some quote unquote tape and look at the draft board and kind of, give you our assessment as far as how things are now, pre NFL combine, pre NFL draft, in terms of draft strategies. And of course, as we go on, we'll do one of these for rookies. We'll do one of these for startups that include rookies. So we'll be breaking down a lot of drafts by you people out there who participate. So we encourage you all to do so. Before we get out of here, JT, anything you want to throw out there to the masses that you're working on?
Just check us out on, if you're a hockey fan or you want to become a hockey fan, or you just, you're bored because college football or pro football's over and there's nowhere else to gamble. Jump on Around the Ice here on Fantasy and Frames, 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central. We talk about fantasy hockey, real life hockey, what's going on. We give you our toast takes, our favorite bets for the night and for the week, things, kind of our strategies, things we're doing. So check that out. Because again, you might not be into hockey now, but look at it, pay attention. Maybe you want to get in a hockey league for next year. So definitely check that out. Right now, NHL hiatus, Four Nations tournament. So, but we're going to be talking about a little bit of that and some other things. On top of that, the Stu with JT brew here on Fantasy and Frames. We're doing all kinds of mock drafts, doing different scoring systems, all this for rookie mocks. So check us out. We did a 3-round super flex half point PPR, 1 point PPR tight end premium earlier tonight. So go back, rewatch that here on YouTube or on the podcast. But we'll be doing those. I'm going to try to get one together every week with a different scoring system, bringing in different people to try to. If you want to get in on those, you want to jump in and draft with us, we're doing them on Sleeper. Send me a message on X at JT Orange, or if you don't have X, again, hit me up on my email, jtorange4@gmail.com, and I will get you a link and get you signed up for those. We're trying to do those Tuesdays or Wednesdays, kind of around the rest of the Fantasy and Frame schedule, depending on who has what. We're trying to sneak those in once a week.
All right, and of course, you can catch me here on Wednesdays on Dynasty 365, as well as here on Shoot the Gap. Article work. Some people have been mentioning, well, when's article work going to start coming here at Fantasy and Frames? Well, you know what? I could put together an article right now, and I could tell you in about a month, useless. Free agency is going to start. What value you get as far as players who are rising or falling, we don't know until it's time for them to start rising or falling, and that's when transactions take place. So look for a lot of those dynasty risers and fallers, both on offense and IDP, to be coming out, right around free agency. You will be getting some IDP prospect articles, rookie prospect articles, as well as offense prospect articles coming out by members of the Fantasy and Frame staff in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for that. But really, we got a lot of shows coming back on. We're glad to interact with everybody. We thank everybody who is interacting with us tonight, staying up with us tonight, watching the show. It's great to be back. Great to have you all joining us, talking about our little niche here of IDP. And again, check out all of our shows at Fantasy and Frames, all the ones that JT is doing. Like, JT, I feel like you're doing the dynasty evaluation. You're doing the stew with JT Brew. You're doing around the ice. I mean, you're doing shoot the gap. You're probably going to go on 1 foot down when you are probably the hardest working podcaster here at Fantasy. So kudos to you for staying up late for this one.
I like to do a little bit of everything, man. You know what? It's one of those things. It's like, I probably should pick a lane, but I just don't want to. I like doing everything. I to talk to Chris at 1 foot down. He's like, you want to do some off season college stuff? I'm like, absolutely. I do. I love it. So I'm all over the fantasy spectrum. I do a little bit of everything, but to me, I have mentioned this before. To me, the variance, all the different things you can do is what makes it fun and exciting. It's not all the same. You can do IDP. You can do a mix. You can do huge leagues. You can do redraft. You can do keeper. Because people are like, man, aren't you sick of redraft leagues? Now you play in Dynasty? I'm like, no, not really. I actually like those because some of them it's a different scoring system. It's a different drafting strategy. So for me, I love the mental side of it, like figuring things out, what to do. I just love football, man. I love football. So I love college football. I love pro football. So all this stuff is good times for me. I'm gonna have to figure out how to get some actual work in. I get my brewery is in construction. Hopefully get back open this spring. So I'm trying to do everything I can in case I get real hold up and not be able to do some stuff here in the next couple of months. So I'm trying to get in everything I can now. Hopefully that's not going to happen. Hopefully we're going to be good. I'll be able to figure out the work schedule, but just in case, I got to get everything in I can.
Dude, more power to you. I love it. Folks, thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you this time, or we'll see you at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central next Wednesday here on Fantasy and Frames Wednesdays. Thank you all for tuning in tonight for both of our shows, and we will see you next week.